With the second pick in the 2003 NBA draft, the Detroit Pistons select Carmelo Anthony from Syracuse University.
Carmelo Anthony has spent his career scoring baskets and facing criticism. The 9-time NBA All-Star has won several individual awards, but has never made the NBA Finals, much less won an NBA title. Because of this, critics have questioned whether Anthony is too much of a me-first scorer to ever find team success. What they forget is that before his NBA career, Carmelo was a winner, finishing his high school career with a 32-1 record his senior year, before winning a national championship with Syracuse, leading 'Cuse to a victory over Kansas where he was named the most outstanding player of the Final Four. Yes, Carmelo Anthony began his NBA career with the image of a winner, an image that has slowly disappeared as he has found himself playing for franchises who could never find him a second star to play with. But looking back at the 2003 draft, what if Carmelo was drafted by the Detroit Pistons, a team that won the NBA championship in 2004 without him? How would this change in draft selection affect Melo's career? How would it affect the NBA as a whole? Well, as you are about to see, it would affect things a lot. The 2004 season comes and brings with it only minor changes. The Detroit Pistons gained 4 wins with Melo starting and Prince as their 6th man, while the Nuggets lose more games without Melo. It is important to note that in real life, Carmelo Anthony and Larry Brown have had disagreements off the court, as Melo took exception to being benched by Brown in the 2004 Olympics. However, we are going to assume in this scenario that Melo is able to learn from and gel with the veteran Detroit Pistons, and thus is able to get along with Larry Brown. And so, the Detroit Pistons still win the 2004 NBA championship, as Melo begins his career by winning a title and also takes home the Rookie of the Year, as he spends his season playing meaningful minutes for one of the NBA's best teams, while LeBron spends his on a losing team in Cleveland. Darko does get slightly more minutes in Denver, however, this just means that fans have more of an opportunity to boo him. Now, let's fast forward past the 2004 NBA draft, because nothing significant changes, and to the 2005 season. Again, the Pistons win 4 more games, and the Nuggets lose 4 more games. Detroit still ends up with the 2 seed in the East, while Denver drops out of the playoffs, as Minnesota picks up 2 wins and takes over the 8th spot in the West. This will matter, stay tuned. Nash still wins MVP, and already in this scenario, we have our first change in champions. Fueled by the contributions of Carmelo Anthony, the Detroit Pistons defeat the San Antonio Spurs in 6 games, as they win a Game 5 against San Antonio that they had originally lost by 1. Already, a change in draft position has altered Melo's destiny, as he has now won 3 championships in a row, 1 at Syracuse and 2 in the NBA, and is known around the NBA as a consummate winner. And moving forward, the 2005 NBA draft has only 1 change, but it is significant. The Nuggets dropped out of the playoffs during the season, so their draft position moves up to 14. With the 14th pick, they target a 3, as their original franchise small forward has been replaced by the bust of the century. Luckily for them, Danny Granger has slid down the draft board and is available, so the Nuggets make the obvious choice and take it. In the 2006 NBA season, Carmelo again leads the Pistons to 4 more wins, as he matures into one of the game's best players. This gives the Pistons 68 wins for the season, a staggering amount, and the number 1 seed in the East. The Pacers, meanwhile, lose more games without Granger, and the Nuggets lose 4 more games without Melo. Nash is still MVP, Chris Paul is still Rookie of the Year, but there are changes in the playoffs. In the original 2006 NBA playoffs, the Miami Heat defeated the Pistons in the Eastern Conference Finals, and then went on to win the NBA championship. However, yet again, Carmelo Anthony changes history, as the young star leads a loaded Pistons team to a victory over the Heat in the Eastern Conference Finals, and then helps the Pistons win the NBA championship. So yes, the selection of Carmelo Anthony helps the Pistons go from a one-time champion to a legitimate NBA dynasty. How about that? We are going to fast forward again past the draft, as nothing notable changes in the 2006 NBA draft. Quick offseason note though, Indiana does not trade their first round pick to Atlanta, because they are now noticeably worse and that pick is much more valuable. With that, we arrive at the 2007 NBA season. There are 2 noticeable changes in the 2007 season, as Detroit wins 5 more games, but more importantly, Indiana loses 7 more games. Expect a whole lot of draft craziness in the near future. The only other difference in this season is that Detroit denies LeBron his first trip to the finals, winning the Eastern Conference Finals before falling to the Spurs. The Spurs championship stops the Pistons' run of 3 consecutive NBA titles, and Dirk Nowitzki and Brandon Roy still win MVP and Rookie of the Year respectively. Every so often in the NBA, there are players that can define a generation. The 2007 NBA draft held one of those players in Kevin Durant. Now, Durant originally went to the Seattle Supersonics, however the Indiana Pacers now hold the 4th odds in the draft lottery, which bumps everyone below them down a spot, which means, yes, the Minnesota Timberwolves fall down one spot in the lottery, but end up with the top pick in the draft, landing they still take Greg Oden. Bust of the century, a pick that makes the Darko Milicic selection look like a downright genius move. So yes, the Atlanta Hawks also fall down one spot in the lottery, but they land the real prize.
With the 2nd pick in the 2007 NBA draft, the Atlanta Hawks select Kevin Durant from the University of Texas.
Horford, by the way, ends up in Indiana, who originally was forced to give their pick to Atlanta, but did not trade away their first-round pick. And the final noticeable change in this draft comes with Joakim Noah, as Noah will no longer spend his career with the Bulls and is instead drafted by the Blazers, who actually are in much better position now than they were with the first pick. The 2008 season is the first in which several teams see changes in their record. The Hawks, without Horford, lose 5 more games as Durant has a very inefficient rookie season. Still, he does put up good scoring numbers and is rewarded as Rookie of the Year. The Pacers have Horford but do not really need him, as they already have a deep front court. They do need a small forward but no longer have Granger, and drop 5 games because of this. And Portland gains 3 wins with the addition of Noah, as he is actually able to participate in games, unlike someone we know. Kobe still wins the MVP, and Boston still defeats Detroit in the Eastern Conference Finals, though this time the series goes 7 games. And with this, Boston still goes on to win the NBA championship, which brings us to the 2008 NBA draft. In the original NBA draft, the Chicago Bulls defied the odds and landed the number 1 pick, which brought their hometown star back to the city he was raised in. Unfortunately for the Bulls, they lost a few more games, which actually hurts their draft positioning, and the Pacers end up with the number 1 pick, which means...
With the 1st pick in the 2008 NBA draft, the Indiana Pacers select Derrick Rose from the University of Memphis.
Yes, the Pacers lost Danny Granger in the 2006 draft, but pick up Al Horford and now Derrick Rose in back-to-back drafts. That is an exchange I am sure they would gladly make. And the only other significant change in this draft is that Brook Lopez goes to the Bulls, as they need a franchise center without Noah. The 2009 season sees some big changes in the record department, as Oklahoma City loses 8 more games without the superstar scoring of Kevin Durant. Chicago loses an extra 6 games without Rose, and New Jersey loses 6 more games without Brook Lopez. The rest of the season stays pretty much the same, however, as Orlando still wins the Eastern Conference Finals in a thrilling run, but is stopped by the Lakers, led by Kobe Bryant and Paul Gasol. LeBron still wins his first MVP award, while Rose still wins Rookie of the Year in Indiana. The 2009 draft was loaded with superstar potential, and changes in the draft lottery lead to changes in draft selections. Washington ends up with the number 1 pick, which means...
With the 1st pick in the 2009 NBA draft, the Washington Wizards select Blake Griffin.
Yes, the Wizards get Blake Griffin, a future NBA superstar. Oh, and in the original draft, they traded their number 5 pick away for Mike Miller, but that's obviously not happening now. Going down the draft, the Clippers now have the 3rd pick and draft Ricky Rubio. Remember, Rubio was a sensation at this time, and was actually projected to be picked 3rd. It was somewhat surprising when he slid to the 5th pick. Also, the Clippers do not need another young wing, as they already have Eric Gordon, who at this time looked like the potential top shooting guard in the NBA in 5 years. But continuing down, the Nets have the opportunity to draft Curry at number 7, but they are the Nets, so they take Jordan Hill. Curry still goes to Golden State, and New York lands DeMar DeRozan, a solid pickup, while Chicago fills the loss of Derrick Rose with Brandon Jennings. And Milwaukee was targeting 3 point guards in this draft, and the only one left is Drew Holiday, so they select him. The 2009 offseason is the first to have significant changes. Atlanta, in need of a center without Al Horford, sends Marvin Williams to the Pacers for Roy Hibbert, Jeff Foster, and a 2nd-round pick. Detroit, meanwhile, still signs Ben Gordon and Charlie Villanueva, who, remember, were 2 of the top free agents in that class. Unfortunately, they do not live up to their free agent hype, and Carmelo is more than a little unhappy with this. The 2010 NBA season does not see much change at the top of the standings, except for Portland, who wins 4 extra games and moves up to the 4th seed in the West. Atlanta also gains 4 wins with its new additions, and Indiana gains a massive 10 wins with Derrick Rose and Al Horford. On the flip side of things, Oklahoma City completely plummets, losing 16 more games without Kevin Durant. As previously stated, the top of the standings is largely unaffected, and the playoffs play out the same way, with the Lakers again defeating the Boston Celtics in the NBA Finals to give Kobe 5 championships for his career. The 2010 NBA Draft Lottery also shows us that not much changed at the bottom of the standings, as the top 6 picks stay the same. The first change comes at the 7th spot, where Greg Monroe is taken by the Clippers, who no longer have Blake. And then the 10th spot.
With the 10th pick in the 2010 NBA Draft, the Oklahoma City Thunder select Paul George of Fresno State University.
Yes, future NBA All-Star Paul George joins Westbrook and Harden in OKC, a pick that offers some relief for the loss of Durant, and certainly makes the future a little brighter in Oklahoma City. The 2010 NBA offseason still ends up with most of the free agents landing with their original teams. Amari still goes to the Knicks, and LeBron and Bosh take their talents to South Beach, where they host a dance party to celebrate. The 2011 season was also the season in which Carmelo Anthony decided he needed to get traded to the Knicks. This still happens, as his new team, the Pistons, have had serious problems after the loss of their original championship core. And Melo gets traded to the Knicks along with Ben Gordon in a deal centered around Danilo Gallinari, Wilson Chandler, and Mozgov. The Knicks also receive a 2012 first-round pick from Detroit in the deal for taking back Ben Gordon's horrible contract. The 2011 season again demonstrates the significance of Derrick Rose, as the Bulls lose 9 more games without him. The Pacers, meanwhile, win 14 more games with Rose paired with Horford. However, Rose does not win the MVP as his team does not win enough games, and LeBron ends up with the trophy. Washington wins 8 extra games with Rookie of the Year Blake Griffin wrecking havoc all over the court, while OKC loses 10 more games as Paul George is not ready to fill the void left by Durant. In the playoffs, things remain the same, as Dallas still upsets the Big Three in the NBA Finals, with Dirk capturing his first NBA title and solidifying his spot as an NBA legend. The original 2011 NBA Draft saw the Cavs luck into the first overall pick. However, this time,
with the first pick in the 2011 NBA Draft, the Detroit Pistons select Kyrie Irving from Duke University.
Yes, Kyrie Irving goes to Detroit, pairing him with newly acquired Danilo Gallinari and Wilson Chandler. The Cavs, meanwhile, end up with Brandon Knight instead of Kyrie, which is a small consolation. The major question of the 2012 season was, where will Chris Paul end up? Unhappy in New Orleans, Paul demands a trade and teams line up to vie for his services. And while several teams had the assets to make a deal work, Paul also made it clear that he wanted to be traded to a good team that could compete for an NBA title. The Los Angeles Clippers no longer have a good enough team in place without Blake to land Paul. However, the Knicks look like a prime Chris Paul destination, centering a deal around their top 2 assets, DeMar DeRozan and the Detroit Pistons pick in the upcoming draft. The Knicks land Chris Paul, bringing CP3 to the city that never sleeps and pairing him up with Melo, giving Melo the great point guard he had been missing throughout his prime. And with this, the Knicks win 11 more games in the 2012 season, finishing 3rd in the East behind Miami and Atlanta, who wins 10 more games with Kevin Durant and Roy Hibbert on the team. The 2 biggest losers are Chicago, who loses 10 more games without Rose and Noah, and the Clippers, who miss stealing Chris Paul and instead have to deal with Eric Gordon's injuries for the next few years. Kevin Durant, keyed by his team's incredible success and his own phenomenal scoring, ends up with his first MVP trophy, while Kyrie wins Rookie of the Year in Detroit. In the playoffs, Miami still ends up winning the Eastern Conference Finals after an angry LeBron goes off against Atlanta, while San Antonio defeats Oklahoma City in the Western Conference Finals without Durant. In the finals, Miami wins their first NBA championship, and LeBron celebrates getting over this huge hump in his career. The 2012 NBA Draft has Sacramento win the NBA Draft Lottery.
With the first pick in the 2012 NBA Draft, the Sacramento Kings select Anthony Davis.
Which means Anthony Davis and DeMarcus Cousins now pair up in Sacramento to form a fearsome big man duo. The former Wildcats actually complement each other pretty well, and they seem destined for success in the future. As for the rest of the draft, Bradley Beal ends up in New Orleans, and the Clippers, keeping their Minnesota pick that they had originally sent to New Orleans in the CP3 deal, draft the best player available in Andre Drummond. The 2012 NBA offseason was originally dominated by 2 superstars leaving their teams, as Dwight Howard and James Harden made headlines by changing locations. Dwight still leaves Orlando, joining Kobe in LA in what will be a colossal mistake for the Lakers. Harden, on the other hand, does not get traded by Oklahoma City, as remember, the only reason they had traded Harden in the first place was that they were afraid of paying 4 players the max. At At this point, Paul George has not yet fully broken out, and Harden was still the clear number 2 player on his team. The 2013 NBA season continued to highlight the dominance of Kevin Durant, as he led Atlanta to 13 extra wins. New York, behind the stellar duo of Chris Paul and Carmelo Anthony, found itself winning an extra 10 games, finishing with an incredible 64 wins and the number 2 seed in the East. Meanwhile, the Clippers desperately missed the duo of Paul and Blake and found themselves losing 11 more games. The 2013 NBA MVP was still given to LeBron James, who led the Heat to the top record in the East. He continued his dominance in the playoffs, defeating the Knicks in the Eastern Conference Finals and then finishing a remarkable season with a finals win against San Antonio. And wrapping up the season, Anthony Davis wins the Rookie of the Year award. The 2013 NBA draft is among the weakest in NBA history. However, some good players do change locations. Victor Oladipo is picked first, which unfortunately means that Charlotte deprives us of one of Bill Simmons' best moments.
Anthony Bennett of Toronto, Canada.
Continuing with the draft, Noel goes to Orlando at number 2, as reports had him as second on their draft board behind Oladipo, and Giannis Antetokounmpo ends up in Washington, pairing him with John Wall and Blake in what surely is an exciting big 3 for Wizards fans. After causing a huge scene by forcing a trade to the Los Angeles Lakers, Dwight Howard spent the 2013 season cowering in Kobe's shadow. He needs to get out of LA before Kobe murders him, and Houston, without James Harden, is no longer an option. Atlanta is very intriguing, however, and they send Roy Hibbert to the Lakers in a sign-and-trade, pairing up Kevin Durant and Dwight Howard with a very solid supporting cast. The Clippers, now with Greg Monroe, Andre Drummond, and DeAndre Jordan, know they need to make a move to free up minutes in the front court. Monroe can play power forward, so he's safe, and they ultimately decide to move Jordan, trading him in a package that contains DeMar DeRozan. A deal that makes sense for both sides. The 2014 season has 2 new teams emerge at the top of the standings. The Atlanta Hawks, with Durant and Dwight, dominate the Eastern Conference, winning 58 games and landing the top seed for the playoffs. Durant in particular dominates the headlines, taking home the NBA scoring title while winning his second MVP. In the West, OKC wins 63 games fueled by their core of Westbrook, Harden, George, and Ibaka, and they find themselves atop the Western Conference standings. Oladipo wins the Rookie of the Year in Charlotte, and several teams find themselves on the opposite end of the spectrum this season, as Houston and Indiana plummet in the standings without Harden and George respectively, while Chicago, Detroit, LA, and Toronto also see noticeable drops in their records. In the playoffs, the Atlanta Hawks finally break through in the Eastern Conference, sending LeBron and the rest of the Big Three in Miami home in a memorable 7-game series. The Thunder also continue their stellar play, as they defeat Portland in the Western Conference Finals. The finals prove that the Thunder are better off with their new lineup, as they defeat the Atlanta Hawks behind great play from their core 4. The original 2014 NBA draft was highlighted by the selection of Andrew Wiggins by the Cleveland Cavaliers, and then the subsequent trade that sent Wiggins to Minnesota. This trade might end up as one of the biggest what-ifs in NBA history, but in this scenario, it never happens, as Wiggins is selected number 1 and stays in Cleveland. We will get to the reasoning behind that in just a minute. Detroit finds themselves with a much better draft position, and they need a big man, so they select Julius Randle. This forces the Lakers to take Noah Vonleh, which at this point seems like a downgrade. In the 2014 NBA offseason, the Rockets match any offer for Chandler Parsons because they no longer have Harden, so they need him. And Trevor Ariza goes to the Pacers, who desperately need a small forward. The 2 biggest stories involve LeBron and Kevin Love. Originally, both LeBron and Love found themselves on the Cavs. However, this no longer happens. With no Kyrie in Cleveland, LeBron stays in Miami. Kevin Love, meanwhile, still demands a trade. The Timberwolves need to get some value out of him and eventually trade him to the Celtics for Marcus Smart, Jared Sullinger, and Brandon Bass. This keeps Rondo in Boston for the season, as he now has a superstar to pass the ball to. The original 2015 season was dominated by the Golden State Warriors, and this still happens, as Golden State has somehow managed to build the same team throughout this scenario, while so many others have seen changes. And speaking of changes, Cleveland loses a whopping 30 more games without Kyrie, LeBron, and Love, while the Clippers also see a heavy change in losses without Paul and Blake. Houston drops 17 wins without Harden, and Atlanta loses 8 more games while Durant loses his season to injury. New York is the big winner this season in terms of record changes, as they jump up 25 wins to finish 4th in the Eastern Conference, as Chris Paul keeps the Knicks in the hunt, while the front office also does not gut their entire team in the mid-season. And Sacramento also sees a noticeable change in record, as AD and Cousins lead the Kings to 12 more wins. The 2015 NBA playoffs, however, are not as interesting as they should be, due to several teams having injuries to key players. In the end, Golden State still takes home the championship, defeating Miami in the finals, and Curry still takes home the regular season MVP. while Wiggins wins Rookie of the Year in Cleveland. And in the final draft in this scenario, we find the first change coming at the 3 spot, as Jahlil Okafor finds himself joining the Denver Nuggets. Kristaps Porzingis is selected by the 76ers, a worse basketball situation for him, but a more favorable situation for his street fighting career. And Moutier ends up in Cleveland while Justice Winslow becomes a Hawk, as Atlanta is owed Brooklyn's pick in this draft. And so there you have it. What could have happened if the Detroit Pistons selected Carmelo Anthony in the 2003 NBA draft. Carmelo is now in a more favorable situation to win now in New York. And more importantly than his current status in New York, this scenario would change Carmelo's current status in NBA history. With 3 championships under his belt, Carmelo Anthony would be considered an NBA legend, and Kevin Durant finds himself with 2 MVPs, which puts him in the same conversation as some of the all-time greats, while Derrick Rose misses out on his MVP title and thus loses his place as the youngest MVP in NBA history. In this long scenario run, championships were also bound to switch hands. The 2004 to 2006 Detroit Pistons cemented themselves as a legitimate NBA dynasty, winning 3 straight titles. And the Oklahoma City Thunder, a team that is currently viewed as the potential "how did they not win a championship" team of this decade, find themselves winning a championship without Durant, and appear to be loaded for the future with Westbrook, Harden, George, and Ibaka. And while championships and MVPs are the obvious changes that occur in this scenario, other changes do occur too, which shows that a single change in a single NBA draft can impact an incredible amount. Blake Griffin, Kyrie Irving, Derrick Rose, Kevin Love. The list of players who are now on different teams seems to go on forever, which really makes you think just how much the NBA can change if we ask ourselves, what if?